The Wyoming wind howled through the valley as Elena stood before the full-length mirror in her grandmother's farmhouse, staring at the wedding dress that hung loosely on her 6'3" frame. Her hands trembled as she touched the delicate lace, wondering how she had ended up here, about to marry a complete stranger. 3 months ago, her life had been different. She had been working 2 jobs in Denver, barely making ends meet while caring for her ailing grandmother. The medical bills had piled up like snowdrifts in winter, threatening to bury them both. Then came the letter from Jackson McAllister, a rancher she had never met, offering a solution that seemed pulled from another century, a marriage of convenience in exchange for taking care of all her financial burdens. At first, Elena had laughed at the absurdity. But desperation has a way of making the impossible seem reasonable. Her grandmother needed surgery. The bank was threatening foreclosure. And Jackson's offer included something she hadn't expected: respect. His letter had been straightforward, almost businesslike, but there was an honesty in his words that touched something deep within her. Now, standing in this borrowed dress in a town where everyone seemed to know everyone except her, Elena felt like a giant among normal-sized people. She had always been tall, towering over most men and women alike. In the city, people had stared. Some had mocked. Others had fetishized her height in ways that made her skin crawl. She had learned to make herself smaller, to hunch her shoulders, to avoid drawing attention. The door creaked open behind her. "It's time," her grandmother whispered, tears glistening in her weathered eyes. The old woman looked healthier already, the color returning to her cheeks now that the weight of debt had been lifted. Elena forced a smile and straightened her spine. She would do this. She had to. The small chapel was filled with curious faces, ranchers and their families who had come to see Jackson McAllister finally take a bride. Elena walked down the aisle alone, her head held high despite the whispers that rippled through the pews. She could feel their eyes assessing her, measuring her against whatever expectations they held. Then she saw him. Jackson stood at the altar, and Elena's breath caught in her throat. He was tall, perhaps 6'5", with broad shoulders that filled his suit jacket and hands that looked like they could break stone or cradle something precious with equal ease. His face was weathered by sun and wind, angular and strong, with eyes the color of storm clouds. But what struck her most was the way he looked at her, not with judgment or surprise, but with something that resembled relief. The ceremony was brief. The Reverend spoke words that seemed to echo from a distant place as Elena tried to steady her racing heart. When Jackson took her hand to slide the ring onto her finger, she noticed the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip, and the gentleness with which he handled her trembling fingers. "I do," she heard herself say, the words feeling both foreign and inevitable. "I do," Jackson replied, his voice deep and steady. The Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, and Jackson leaned down to brush his lips against hers in a kiss that was proper and brief but sent electricity racing down her spine. When he pulled back, his eyes held a question she couldn't quite decipher. The reception was held at Jackson's ranch, a sprawling property with mountain views that took Elena's breath away. She smiled and nodded as strangers congratulated her, but her attention kept drifting to her new husband, who moved through the crowd with quiet confidence, his hand occasionally finding the small of her back in a gesture that felt both protective and possessive. As the sun began to set and the guests finally departed, Elena found herself alone with Jackson in the ranch house. The reality of her situation crashed down on her like a wave. She was married to this man. This stranger. And now they were alone. The ranch house was larger than Elena had expected, with high ceilings and wide doorways that accommodated Jackson's impressive frame. He gave her a tour in near silence, pointing out the kitchen, the living room, the guest bedrooms. His voice was low and measured, revealing nothing of what he might be thinking or feeling. Finally, they reached the master bedroom at the end of the hallway. Jackson pushed open the door and stepped aside to let Elena enter first. The room was masculine but not unwelcoming, with dark wood furniture and windows that overlooked the mountains. The massive bed dominated the space, and Elena felt her stomach clench with anxiety. "Your belongings arrived yesterday," Jackson said, gesturing to several boxes stacked neatly in the corner. "I put them in here, but if you'd prefer one of the other rooms, I can move them." Elena turned to face him, confusion flickering across her features. "I don't understand." Jackson's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "This marriage, Elena. It's legal and binding, but I'm not the kind of man who expects anything you're not ready to give. We barely know each other. You can have your own space until you decide otherwise." Something in Elena's chest loosened. She had been bracing herself for demands, for expectations, for the taking of rights that a marriage license supposedly granted. Instead, this mountain of a man was offering her a choice. "Thank you," she whispered, and meant it. Jackson nodded and turned to leave, but Elena's voice stopped him. Why did you do this? Why did you offer to marry someone you'd never met? He paused in the doorway, his back still to her. For a long moment, he said nothing, and Elena wondered if he would answer at all. Then his shoulders rose and fell with a deep breath. This ranch has been in my family for 4 generations, he said quietly. My grandfather built it with his bare hands. My father expanded it. And I've spent the last 15 years keeping it running, working sunup to sundown, barely stopping long enough to sleep. I'm 38 years old, and I've never had time for dating or courtship or any of the normal ways people find each other. He turned then, leaning against the door frame, his eyes meeting hers with surprising vulnerability. But a ranch this size, it needs more than one person to truly thrive. And a house this big, it feels empty with just me rattling around in it. I wanted a partner, Elena. Someone to build something with. Someone who needed what I could offer as much as I needed what they could bring. And you chose me because of a photograph? Elena asked, remembering the picture her grandmother had sent with her desperate letter explaining their situation. I chose you because your grandmother's letter was honest, Jackson said. She told me about your struggles, about your strength, about how you worked yourself to exhaustion trying to take care of her. She told me you were tall and strong and capable. She also told me that people had made you feel like those things were flaws instead of gifts. His jaw tightened. I know what that's like. Elena's eyes widened. What do you mean? Jackson ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture that seemed almost boyish despite his imposing size. I'm not like other ranchers around here. I'm bigger, quieter. I don't fit in at the social gatherings. Women have looked at me like I'm either a freak or a trophy, never just a man. Your grandmother said you understood what it meant to be different. I thought maybe we could understand each other. The honesty in his words pierced through Elena's defenses. She had expected many things from this arrangement, but not this raw admission of loneliness, of longing for connection beyond the transactional nature of their agreement. I do understand, she said softly. They stood there in the hallway, the space between them charged with unspoken possibilities. Finally, Jackson cleared his throat and stepped back. Get some rest, he said. Morning comes early on a ranch. I'll see you at breakfast. He disappeared down the hallway, and Elena heard a door close somewhere in the distance. She returned to the master bedroom and slowly unpacked a few essentials, her mind spinning with everything that had happened. She changed into her nightgown and climbed into the enormous bed, feeling small and lost in its expanse. Sleep came fitfully, filled with dreams of storm-gray eyes and gentle hands. The morning sun painted the Wyoming sky in shades of gold and pink as Elena made her way to the kitchen, following the scent of coffee. She found Jackson already awake, standing at the stove cooking breakfast with the efficiency of someone who had been doing it alone for a long time. Morning, he said without turning around. Hope you're hungry. Ranch work builds an appetite. Over the following weeks, Elena discovered a rhythm to life on the ranch that was both demanding and strangely satisfying. Jackson taught her how to care for the horses, how to mend fences, how to read the weather in the mountains. He was patient and thorough, never making her feel inadequate when she struggled with tasks that were second nature to him. What surprised Elena most was how natural it felt to work alongside him. For the first time in her life, her height and strength were assets rather than liabilities. She could reach things without a ladder, carry heavy supplies without struggling, match Jackson's long stride without having to hurry. When they worked together moving equipment or handling the larger animals, they moved like a well-choreographed team. You're a natural, Jackson said one afternoon as they finished repairing a section of fence. His face was streaked with dirt, and there was approval in his eyes that made Elena's chest warm. I've never done anything like this before, she admitted, wiping sweat from her forehead. Doesn't matter where you start. Matters what you're willing to learn. Jackson handed her a canteen of water, and their fingers brushed. The contact sent a jolt through Elena that had nothing to do with the physical labor they'd been doing. Their nights fell into a comfortable pattern. They would share dinner, during which Jackson would tell her stories about the ranch's history or explain his plans for expanding the operation. Elena found herself contributing ideas, drawing on creative problem-solving skills she had developed during her years of juggling multiple jobs. Jackson listened to her suggestions with genuine interest, sometimes implementing them in ways that made her feel truly valued. But they still slept in separate rooms. Elena had moved some of her belongings into the guest bedroom at Jackson's insistence, though she found herself lingering in the master bedroom sometimes, caught by the scent of leather and pine that clung to everything Jackson touched. She wondered if he ever thought about her the way she increasingly thought about him, with a longing that went beyond their practical arrangement. One evening, a storm rolled in from the mountains with violent intensity. Rain lashed against the windows, and thunder shook the house. Elena was reading in the living room when the power went out, plunging everything into darkness. She heard Jackson moving through the house, lighting oil lamps with practiced ease. "You okay?" he asked, appearing in the doorway with a lamp that cast dancing shadows across his features. "I'm fine," Elena said, but a particularly loud crack of thunder made her jump despite herself. Jackson set the lamp down and sat beside her on the couch, maintaining a respectful distance. "These mountain storms can be intense. They'll pass, though. They always do." They sat in companionable silence, watching the storm rage outside. Elena became acutely aware of Jackson's presence, the warmth radiating from his body, the steady rhythm of his breathing. Without thinking, she leaned slightly toward him. "Elena," Jackson said quietly, his voice rough. "I need to tell you something." She turned to look at him, her heart suddenly pounding. In the lamplight, his face was all sharp angles and shadows, beautiful in a fierce, untamed way. "This arrangement," he continued, "it was supposed to be simple. Practical. But you're making it complicated." Elena's stomach dropped. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean." "You're making it complicated," Jackson interrupted, "because I'm falling for you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. Elena stared at him, barely able to process what she had heard. "I know it's only been a few weeks," Jackson said, the words coming faster now, as if he had been holding them back for too long. "I know we agreed this was just a business arrangement. But watching you every day, seeing how hard you work, hearing you laugh, the way you've made this house feel like a home." He stopped, running a hand through his hair in that gesture she had come to recognize as nervous vulnerability. "I can't pretend anymore that this is just practical." Elena's breath caught. "Jackson, I." Another crack of thunder split the sky, but neither of them flinched. They were too focused on each other, on this moment that felt like standing at the edge of something vast and terrifying and wonderful. "You don't have to say anything," Jackson said quickly. "I just needed you to know. Nothing has to change. We can keep things the way they are." But Elena was shaking her head, a smile breaking across her face like sunrise. "What if I don't want things to stay the way they are?" The storm continued to rage as Elena and Jackson sat facing each other in the lamplight, the confession hanging between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Elena's hands trembled as she reached up to touch Jackson's face, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. "I've been so scared," she whispered. "Scared of wanting this, of wanting you. I told myself it was just gratitude, just relief at finding a safe place. But it's more than that, Jackson. So much more." His hand came up to cover hers, pressing her palm against his cheek. "I'm scared too. I don't want to rush you. I don't want to mess this up." "Then let's not rush," Elena said. "Let's just be honest." The honesty she spoke of led them through the following days like a thread through a maze. They continued working side by side on the ranch, but now there were touches that lingered, looks that conveyed volumes, conversations that stretched late into the night as they shared their pasts, their fears, their dreams. One evening, nearly a month after their wedding, Elena stood in front of the mirror in the master bedroom. She had moved back into this room a week ago, but still, she and Jackson had maintained their careful boundaries, sleeping with pillows between them like a wall neither dared to breach. Tonight felt different. The air itself seemed charged with anticipation as Elena prepared for bed. She wore a new nightgown, something soft and feminine that she had purchased in town, finally allowing herself to feel beautiful rather than awkward in her tall frame. A soft knock came at the door. "Elena? May I come in?" "Yes," she called, her voice steadier than she felt. Jackson entered, and his eyes widened when he saw her. He had seen her in work clothes, in casual wear, even in her old threadbare nightgowns. But this was different. This was intentional. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Elena felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I wanted to talk to you about something." Jackson moved closer, stopping just within arm's reach. "What is it?" Elena took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I've spent so much of my life making myself smaller, trying to fit into spaces that weren't built for me, apologizing for taking up room. But here, with you, I don't feel like I need to do that anymore." "You never needed to," Jackson said fiercely. "You're perfect as you are." "I'm starting to believe that," Elena said softly. "Because of you. Because of how you look at me, how you respect me, how you've given me space to choose." She stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "And I'm choosing you, Jackson. Completely. If you'll have me." Jackson's breath caught. His hands came up to frame her face, tilting it toward his. Elena, are you sure? Because once we cross this line, I don't think I can go back. I don't think I can pretend this is just an arrangement anymore. I don't want you to pretend, Elena whispered. I don't want to pretend either. The kiss that followed was nothing like their brief, formal kiss at the altar. This was fire and tenderness, passion and promise. Jackson's arms wrapped around Elena, pulling her against him, and for the first time, she felt perfectly matched, perfectly held. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Jackson's forehead rested against hers. There's something I need to tell you, he said. Something I should have told you before. Elena's stomach clenched with sudden anxiety. What is it? Jackson took her hand and led her to sit on the edge of the bed. You asked me why I chose you, why I sent that offer. I told you part of the truth, but not all of it. Elena waited, her heart pounding. I saw your photograph before your grandmother's letter arrived, Jackson continued. A mutual acquaintance showed it to me months earlier, mentioned you were struggling. But I didn't act on it then because I thought I had no right. What could I offer someone I'd never met except money, and that felt wrong, like charity. He paused, his grip on her hand tightening. Then my father died last year. Suddenly. Heart attack while he was out checking fences. And standing at his funeral, watching them lower him into the ground, I realized I had become exactly like him, so focused on work, on duty, on keeping this ranch running that I had forgotten to live. He died alone, Elena. No wife, no partner. Just me and the land. And I thought, is that how I want to end up? Elena's eyes filled with tears as she saw the pain in Jackson's face. So when your grandmother's letter came, it felt like fate, Jackson said. Like I was being given a chance to not make my father's mistakes. But I need you to know that even though this started as an arrangement, what I feel for you is real. I'm not trying to fill an empty space in my life. I'm not trying to use you. I'm falling in love with you, Elena. Maybe I was falling before I even met you. And that terrifies me because I know I could mess this up. Elena reached up to wipe tears from her cheeks, overwhelmed by the raw honesty of his confession. You won't mess it up, she said. Because I'm falling too. And we're falling together. Jackson's response was to kiss her again, deeper this time, with a hunger that had been building for weeks. Elena responded with equal fervor, her hands sliding up his chest, feeling the strong muscles beneath his shirt. When Jackson's fingers found the zipper at the back of her nightgown, he paused, pulling back to look into her eyes. Please, Elena whispered. Don't stop. But Jackson's hand stilled on the zipper. Elena, wait. I need you to be absolutely sure. I am sure, she said, but her voice trembled. Jackson noticed. His thumb brushed across her cheek, catching a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. You're shaking. Elena let out a shaky laugh. I know. It's stupid. I want this, I want you, but... But what? Jackson prompted gently. What if I'm not what you expect? The words tumbled out. What if my body isn't right? What if I'm too tall, too awkward? What if? Jackson silenced her with a kiss so tender it made her chest ache. When he pulled back, his storm gray eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Listen to me, he said. You are magnificent. Every inch of you. Your height, your strength, your courage. The way you stand tall when you've spent years trying to make yourself small. The way you faced every challenge on this ranch without backing down. Elena, you're not too anything except too far away from me right now. His fingers moved to the zipper again, but this time when he began to pull it down, his movements were slow, reverent, giving her every opportunity to stop him. Tell me to stop and I will, he murmured against her neck. Tell me to slow down and I will. This is your choice, Elena. Always your choice. Elena's hands came up to cover his, but instead of pushing them away, she guided them lower, helping him ease the nightgown from her shoulders. Don't stop, she whispered. Please don't stop. The morning sun filtered through the curtains as Elena woke in Jackson's arms, her body still humming with the memory of the night before. She had never felt so completely seen, so thoroughly cherished. Jackson had been gentle and passionate, attentive and wild, showing her with his hands and mouth and body that every word of praise he had spoken was true. Good morning, Jackson's deep voice rumbled against her ear. His arms tightened around her, pulling her closer against his chest. Sleep well? Elena turned to face him, marveling at how natural it felt to wake up like this, tangled together in the big bed that no longer felt too large. Better than I have in years. Jackson's smile transformed his usually serious face, making him look younger, lighter. Me too. They lay there for a while, talking quietly about nothing and everything, until the sounds of the ranch waking up around them reminded them of responsibilities waiting. As they dressed, Elena caught Jackson watching her with an expression of such contentment that it made her heart swell. The following weeks brought a deepening of their connection that extended beyond the physical. They worked as true partners, making decisions together about the ranch's future. Elena's suggestions for diversifying their operations were met with enthusiasm, and Jackson helped her implement ideas she had never had the resources or support to try before. One afternoon, Elena was in the barn office working on a business plan for a tourism component she wanted to add to the ranch when Martha, one of their neighbors, stopped by unexpectedly. The older woman had been cool to Elena since the wedding, part of the contingent that had viewed the arranged marriage with suspicion. "I came to apologize," Martha said bluntly, surprising Elena. "I thought you were just some city girl taking advantage of Jackson's loneliness. But I've watched you these past months. You've earned your place here." Elena blinked back unexpected tears. "Thank you. That means a lot." Martha smiled, her weathered face crinkling. "You and Jackson, you're good together. The ranch is thriving, but more than that, he's thriving. I haven't seen him this happy since before his father passed. You've given him something money can't buy." After Martha left, Elena sat for a long moment, reflecting on how much her life had changed. She had come to Wyoming expecting to fulfill a contract, to pay off debts and provide security for her grandmother. Instead, she had found a home, a purpose, and a love that filled all the empty spaces she hadn't even realized existed. That evening, as she and Jackson sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold, Elena broached a subject that had been on her mind. "My grandmother wants to come visit," she said. "She's recovered well from her surgery, and she wants to see the ranch." "See us?" Jackson's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Of course she should come. She's family. This is her home too, if she wants it to be." Elena turned to look at him, love flooding through her. "Have I told you today how amazing you are?" "Once or twice," Jackson said with a grin. "But I'll never get tired of hearing it." As summer turned to fall, the ranch bustled with activity. Elena's tourism initiative launched successfully, bringing guests who wanted to experience authentic ranch life. She and Jackson hired additional help, creating jobs in the community and building relationships with neighboring ranches. Elena's grandmother came to visit and ended up staying through Christmas, her eyes shining with joy as she watched her granddaughter blossom in this new life. On Christmas Eve, Jackson surprised Elena with a gift that made her cry: adoption papers for the ranch itself, legally making her not just his wife but his equal partner in everything they had built. "You're not just living here," Jackson said as she read through the documents with trembling hands. "You belong here. This is yours as much as it's mine. Everything we build from now on, we build together." Winter brought its own challenges, but Elena and Jackson faced them as they faced everything now, side by side, neither too big nor too small, but perfectly matched. When storms raged, they weathered them together. When spring came and the calves were born, they celebrated new life together. One warm May evening, a year after their wedding, Elena stood on the porch looking out at the land she now thought of as truly hers. Jackson came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "Penny for your thoughts," he murmured. Elena leaned back against him, secure in his embrace. "I was thinking about that first night, when you offered to let me have my own room. When you gave me a choice. I remember. I was so grateful then," Elena continued. "So relieved that you weren't going to pressure me or force me into anything I wasn't ready for. But now I understand it was more than that. You were showing me that I had value beyond the transaction, beyond the arrangement. You were seeing me as a person worthy of respect and patience." Jackson turned her in his arms to face him. "You've always been worthy of that." "I know that now," Elena said, rising on her toes to kiss him. "Because you taught me. You taught me to stand tall, to take up space, to be unapologetically myself. And in return, I hope I've taught you that you don't have to face everything alone anymore." "You have," Jackson assured her. "Every single day." As the sun set over the mountains they had claimed together, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had arrived as a desperate woman accepting an arrangement born of necessity, and she had become a rancher, a partner, a wife in the truest sense of the word. She had learned that love doesn't always begin with passion and romance. Sometimes it starts with respect and grows through shared purpose and deepens through choosing each other every day. The ranch that had once belonged to Jackson's ancestors now belonged to both of them, nurtured by 4 hands instead of 2, strengthened by partnership instead of solitude. And in the house that had once echoed with loneliness, laughter now rang out freely, along with the sounds of life fully lived, arguments and reconciliations, quiet conversations and passionate encounters, the daily rhythms of two people building something lasting. "I love you," Elena whispered against Jackson's chest as they stood together in the gathering dark. "I love you too," Jackson replied. "My partner. My wife. My perfect match." And standing there in the doorway of the home they had created together, neither too tall nor too different but exactly right for each other, they knew that some arrangements turn into destiny, some contracts transform into covenants, and some marriages that begin as solutions to problems become the answer to prayers neither person knew they had been praying. The giant bride no longer trembled, because she had found a place where she belonged, standing tall beside a man who had always seen her clearly, not as too much or not enough, but as exactly who she was meant to be.